Good evening. I'm going to start with two facts that appeared side by side on the Davos stage, and they matter for energy policy far beyond Switzerland. First, President Donald Trump used his World Economic Forum appearance to single out the United Kingdom's energy policy, arguing, "The UK is sitting on major North Sea reserves but is making production impossible through regulation and taxation." Second, independent fact-checkers are disputing key elements of the claims he used to make that case, especially his figures around what the UK government takes from North Sea oil. So tonight we're going to do something very straightforward. We're going to walk through what President Trump said, what is verifiable, what is contested, and what the real policy debate is, without the heat, without the hype, and without guessing what happens next. Because the issue at the center of this isn't just a soundbite about drilling. It's about energy security, taxation, climate targets, investment incentives, and the messaging that happens when a U.S. president publicly critiques a close ally on a global stage. Davos isn't just another political stop. The World Economic Forum annual meeting is designed as a high-profile venue where heads of government, CEOs, investors, and policy leaders talk about economic direction, often in broad terms, but with real markets listening closely. So when a U.S. president uses that platform to criticize a specific ally's domestic policy, especially on energy, that's not just a UK story. It's also a signal to companies, to international investors, and to governments that coordinate with the UK on trade, security, and climate policy. In his Davos address, President Trump criticized what he called green energy policies in Europe and the UK, and then moved into a pointed example, the North Sea. He told the audience that the UK produces just 1/3 of the total energy from all sources that it did in 1999, and argued Britain is sitting on top of the North Sea, which he described as one of the greatest reserves in the world. He then challenged the idea that the North Sea is depleted, claiming it has 500 years of oil, and argued that environmental restrictions and the tax take make it uneconomical for companies to drill. World Economic, and he made one specific numeric claim that has drawn the most scrutiny. He said the UK takes 92% of the revenues. That is the quote being repeated in headlines on social media and in political reaction. So let's slow down and separate three different questions that are being blended together. BBC Verify examined several claims from the Davos speech, including Trump's statement that the UK takes 92% of the revenues from North Sea oil. The BBC's key point is a basic but crucial distinction. UK oil and gas firms pay taxes on profits, not on revenue. BBC Verify summarized the structure this way. Companies pay a 30% corporation tax on profits, plus a 10% supplementary rate, and then a windfall tax, which the BBC says was raised to 38% in November 2024. The BBC concludes this produces a 78% total tax rate, and it is paid on profits, not revenue. Now, to be clear, in public debate, people often use tax take figures loosely, but in policy terms, 92% of revenues and 78% of profits are not remotely the same thing. And if you're trying to understand incentives, whether companies invest, whether production continues, and whether projects get sanctioned, the profit-based structure matters. Revenue equals total sales value. Profit equals revenue minus costs. Taxes apply to profit in this regime, not total sales. To ground this in primary documentation, the UK's North Sea Transition Authority, often abbreviated as the NSTA, lays out the current upstream tax structure publicly. On its taxation overview page, the NSTA lists the components as ring-fence corporation tax at 30%, supplementary charge at 10%, energy profits levy at 38%, petroleum revenue tax at 0%. And it states, the current marginal tax rate is 78%. The NSTA page also notes the energy profits levy is due to end on 31 March 2030, subject to a mechanism that could end it early if prices fall to historically normal levels for a sustained period. So on the tax question, the verifiable public documentation aligns with the BBC's framing. The widely cited number is a 78% marginal rate, and it is applied to ring-fenced profits under the regime described. Now let's address the second half of the dispute, policy. President Trump's critique implied the UK is blocking production and underusing a major reserve, but the UK government's published North Sea policy framework emphasizes something different, a managed transition that supports existing fields while limiting new exploration. In a UK government announcement on what it calls a North Sea Future Plan, the government says it will manage existing oil and gas fields for their lifespan. and it says it will not issue new licenses to explore new fields. That same document describes a mechanism called transitional energy certificates, intended to enable limited oil and gas production on or near existing fields without new exploration. As part of an orderly transition, it also frames the North Sea as central to clean energy and industrial strategy while acknowledging declining reserves and job losses, citing more than 70,000 jobs lost in the sector between 2016 and 2023, attributed to Offshore Energy's UK data in the notes section. So, if you compare these positions, Trump's message at Davos was, drill more, loosen constraints, and the UK will be stronger on energy. The UK government's formal message is, manage existing production but stop new exploration licenses and scale new clean energy investment and job pathways. That's the actual policy disagreement. And it's why this controversy matters. It's not a personal argument. It's a clash between two strategic models. Trump's claim that the UK produces one-third of the energy it did in 1999 is not just a statistic, it's a rhetorical device. It compresses decades of complex change, North Sea decline, electricity market shifts, efficiency changes, and the growth of renewable generation into one blunt line meant to create urgency. But energy production can be measured in different ways. Primary energy, electricity generation, domestic production versus imports, and so on. In this script, we are not going to pick a single chart and pretend it answers everything. We'll just state what we can verify from primary documentation we have in hand. Trump did make that claim in his Davos remarks. World Economic Forum, the UK government itself says North Sea oil and gas production is in natural decline and highlights long-run job losses and declining reserves. So even without litigating the exact one-third figure, the underlying reality is not controversial. The North Sea is not the North Sea of the early 2000s, and that's where the policy question becomes real. This debate often collapses into slogans, drill more on one side, stop oil on the other. But the UK government's own policy language tries to balance three constraints at once. Maintain energy security while existing production declines. Keep climate commitments and manage emissions. Protect workers and communities through an industrial transition. That's the UK government's stated framework. Trump's critique effectively argues that the balance has gone too far, too restrictive, too expensive, too hostile to investment. And this is where the tax discussion matters again. Because when the NSTA describes a 78% marginal tax rate on ring-fenced profits, that number becomes part of a larger question. How do you keep mature basin investment attractive while also capturing public revenue and funding transition priorities? That's not a culture war question. That's an industrial policy question. At the time we're recording, there's a lot of coverage describing Trump's remarks as an attack on UK energy policy and summarizing that he criticized the UK for not exploiting North Sea reserves. But what we're not going to do tonight is claim we have a complete and final diplomatic response, unless it is publicly documented and attributable. This is still a developing story in the sense that political reaction and policy messaging can evolve quickly after a major Davos speech. So here's the safe, verifiable bottom line. The remarks were made publicly in the Davos speech transcript published by the World Economic Forum. The claims are being fact-checked publicly, including by BBC Verify, which disputes key numeric assertions and clarifies the profit versus revenue distinction. UK policy documentation describes a managed transition, support existing fields, restrict new exploration licenses, and use limited mechanisms for near-field production without new exploration. That's what we can stand on. There's also a diplomatic layer here. When a US president criticizes an ally, at Davos especially a major ally, there are at least three audiences listening. Domestic political audiences, who interpret the remarks through partisan frames. Energy companies and investors, who listen for signals that policy environments might change. Governments and institutions, who watch for stress in alliances and coordination. Sky News' summary of the Davos speech places the UK remarks alongside Trump's broader criticisms of Europe, NATO, and other allies, suggesting the UK segment was part of a larger message about energy and Western strength. And BBC Verify's fact-check reminds us that in global forums, precise numbers matter. Because if decision-makers accept an incorrect framing, like the government takes 92% of revenue, that can distort the public's understanding of what the policy actually is. When people talk about drilling the North Sea, they often imagine a switch you flip. But the North Sea is a mature basin. Many fields are older, costs can be higher, decommissioning is a major part of the life cycle, and production declines over time. So policy debates about use it versus don't use it are often debates about which projects are economically viable at current and expected prices, how taxation affects marginal investment decisions, and how much additional production can be achieved without new exploration. That's why the UK government's plan emphasizes tiebacks and near-field development rather than wide new exploration licensing. 12. Offshore platform. Use oil platform in the North Sea. Wikimedia. Let's recap cleanly. Fact. President Trump criticized the UK at Davos for not exploiting North Sea reserves and claimed the UK takes 92% of the revenues. World Economic Forum contested. BBC Verify says the 92% of revenues framing is incorrect and clarifies the UK's tax is 78% on profits, not revenue, under the structure it describes. BBC Primary Framework. The UK's North Sea Transition Authority lists the current tax regime components and explicitly states the marginal tax rate is 78%. NSTA Policy Direction. UK government documentation says it will manage existing fields for their lifespan, not issue new exploration licenses for new fields, and use limited certificates for production tied to existing infrastructure. Gov.uk so viewers can see the lines clearly: rhetoric, fact check, and official policy. Now, here's the core question underneath all of this. When the North Sea is declining and climate pressure is rising, and energy prices are politically sensitive, what does energy security mean in practice for the UK? Is it maximizing domestic production for as long as possible, accelerating the transition and managing decline, or trying to do both with a tight set of constraints? The UK government's policy language suggests it's trying to do both, with a managed approach and a large emphasis on jobs and new industries. Trump's speech argues the UK has leaned too far toward restriction, and that the costs show up as high prices and reduced production. That is the institutional test, and it's not going away after one Davos speech. So what happens next? We are not going to speculate about policy reversals or diplomatic outcomes, but we can tell you what to watch based on the structures already in place. Watch for UK official responses that clarify the government's stance on licensing, taxation, and investment incentives. Further fact-checking and data releases as media outlets scrutinize Davos claims in more detail. BBC regulatory and fiscal updates from the NSTA as the levy timeline and thresholds evolve toward the stated 2030 endpoint. Investor and industry reaction, particularly around near-field developments and tieback projects, implied by the UK's transitional framework. And here's the open question we'll leave you with tonight. If leaders can't even agree on the basic numbers, revenue versus profit, tax take versus investment incentives, how does the public evaluate energy policy in a way that's grounded in reality rather than slogans? That's the real stress test after Davos. That's our report for now. If you want a follow-up episode, we can do one focused strictly on the North Sea tax regime, what each component is and how it compares to other producers.